Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate of St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. As we continue our series on the history of the Mass, today's Do You Know series question is, do you know the impact on the Reformation on the celebration of the Mass? We know that for many centuries, calls for reforms were being issued by many people simply because they observed that the church had either gone off, especially with regards to liturgy, had gone off on the wrong track and led to many abuses. And so many people started to call for reform. And the reform was to move the liturgy back into the hands of the people and away from the exclusive domain of the ordained. People like John Huss, John Wycliffe, Desiderius Erasmus, all these people and many others, long before Luther came on the scene, were calling for reforms that would restore the celebration of the liturgy in the hands of the people and making them much more active participants. Many of them were not successful. Some were killed, many were suppressed, and so on. However, when Martin Luther comes along, he proves to be successful in his call for reform. Unfortunately, the expense, it was at the cost of church unity. It's certainly not something that Martin Luther wanted, but the various circumstances that were existing at the time led to this regretful path. In 1517, Martin Luther posts his 95 Theses on the church door, and the whole process begins of the call to reform. And the call to reform was primarily focused on the liturgy. As with other previous reformers, the main reason why the focus was on the liturgy because they were going according to an ancient principle known as lex orandi, lex credendi. And this was the principle that the way people worshipped really impacted what people believed. And therefore, focusing on the liturgy and reforming the liturgy would ultimately also change the mindset of the people with regards to what they believed about the liturgy and so on. And so this was the reason why many reformers, including Martin Luther, spent a good bit of time calling for reforms in the liturgy. And responding, as I said, to many of the abuses, Luther called for a variety of changes with regards to the Mass. The first and foremost was a general theological principle that he established called the priesthood of all believers, in which all shared in the priesthood of Christ, not just the ordained. Secondly, he insisted that faith would be much more important than and more central than any ritual action, because oftentimes in ritual action, people merely attended and not really participated. That a simple ritual of the Mass would connect more with people's lives than a kind of elaborate style of celebrating Mass. He insisted that the preaching had to be based on the Scriptures and had to be preaching that really impresses and inspires people. And that also, long before Vatican II, he called for the liturgy in the language of the people. He also called for singing at all Masses, where people could all participate in the singing. Therefore, all these changes were intended to restore the full participation of the people in worship, and that he even called, for example, and many of the other people before him called for the cup was to be shared with the people and not just the bread, in order to respond to the full participation in the Eucharist. The gospel were to be the main focus of Christian behavior and Christian beliefs and so on, and not so much rules and regulations and so on. The gospel were to be the norm for all sorts of behavior and so on. And so many of these things really challenged the existing ways in which some of the ritual of the liturgy was being practiced and was being done, and called for, as I said, these reforms, which ultimately were to put the liturgy back into the hands of the people and not become the exclusive domain of the ordained. The community, the liturgical celebration would have been a communal celebration in which all could participate. The unfortunate thing is, with Luther setting up many of these calls for reform, the unfortunate thing was that the church was not ready to respond. It took a long time for the church to respond to many of the reforms that Luther had set up. And by the time they did, with the calling of the Council of Trent in 1545, the disunity and many of the changes that occurred were beyond repair. There was no way in which unity could be restored once again. And so unfortunately, the church disunity and the shattering of the church unity was an unfortunate result of this call for reform. However, it did emphasize the fact to get back to the earlier dynamics of the liturgy in which all people participated. So I hope this has helped to explain just a bit about how the Luther and the Reformation impacted the celebration of Mass, and I hope you'll return again once more to more Do You Know series questions as we explore the response of the Church in and through the Council of Trent and how it impacted the Mass in response to the Reformation. Thank you very much.